meeting is being recorded. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class. I am your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and this is an ongoing online drawing and painting series brought to you by Michaels. And we meet on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. and we use all of the supplies that you might find at Michaels. Right now we are starting a linear perspective series. So this is the first of several classes over the next few months that will focus on all the different angles, pun intended, of linear perspective and atmospheric perspective. And tonight's class is on 1-point perspective studies. So we will be talking a lot about the differences between 1, 2, and 3-point perspective tonight. We will cover very briefly, I'll talk about just the intro to linear perspective, and then I'll reference some classes that you can look to if you are brand new, you've never drawn a box in 1 or 2 or 3-point perspective, and you don't know the very basics of it. I've got some other classes that we did about a year and a half ago when we first started this series that you can refer back to. And then we're just going to get into some studies using some images of architecture that I provided for you. And we'll be using the same linear perspective study images that I provided for this class over the course of the next few months, although we'll sprinkle in some other imagery to study perspective as well. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to my tabletop view. And I'll talk about supplies. So tonight's class, we're going to be using those reference photos that I mentioned and studying some architecture to do a couple of 1-point perspective studies that may look something like this. But do not put a whole lot of pressure on yourself to have a product that looks like this by the end of the class. I definitely have a tendency to sometimes spend a little bit of extra time when I'm creating demos like this. This will, the amount of detail that you'll put in this will depend on your practice level and where you are in your journey, but I'm definitely going to help you figure out how to make your way towards a study or a thumbnail like this. And we're working small so that we can get as far as we possibly can in an hour. I'm going to be using Faber-Castell pencils. I've got this little 6 pencil set here. You can also use, any sketching pencils that you prefer. You could even use a mechanical pencil for what we're doing tonight would be fine, but I've got this little 6 set. I always use a little bit darker pencil on screen than the pencil that I want you to use, but I'll get to that in just a moment. I've got a synthetic eraser, and I've got a Westcott ruler that I like. It has this little wedge thing in the middle so to move it around. And then we've got the reference photos, and you're going to want a sketchbook. I am going to be using this sketchbook. One moment. Let me close it a little bit to show you the cover. We're using the Canson drawing sketchbook. And don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and follow or tag me on Instagram. I'm at Adrienne Hodge Art. I've also got a few business cards here with some of my ethereal skyscapes from several years back. You can also find me on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art. And tonight on Instagram, I'm going to reinstate my live Q&As that I used to do at the end of each class. So if you want to join me right after class tonight on Instagram, I'll be doing a live feed for about 20-30 minutes, depending on how many people attend, and I can answer any lingering questions that you might have after the class tonight. And I can also tell you about some classes that I have outside of these Michael's classes if you want to check those out. And then upcoming, because I mentioned this is a part of a long series, I'm just going to talk about what's happening the rest of this month. So after tonight's class on 1-point perspective studies, you should be able to follow along while we create this lovely little mixed media piece. So we're going to start with just the sketch of this. Next week, we'll be doing just the bare bones sketching in pencil of this cupcake in a city scene with some 1-point perspective behind it, particularly just the table really is what's in 1-point perspective, and the plate and the cupcake itself and this glass. So we'll be focusing on the perspective and sketching that out in next week's class. And then in the 2 classes following that, we'll be filling this in with watercolor and some pen and ink. So that will be really fun, and hopefully you can join me for those classes. The 2 classes where we fill this in with watercolor are going to be, and pen and ink, those are going to be premium classes. So you want to make sure you sign up for those ahead of time, because the recordings for those premium classes are only sent to folks who registered ahead of time, unlike these free classes, which are posted on YouTube the next day, and you can reference these very easily after they're posted. Okay, any questions about upcoming classes or anything like that, or the supply list? Doesn't seem like it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to talking about these reference photos briefly here. So tonight's class, we're doing 1-point perspective studies. Next month, at the start of the month, we'll get into 2-point perspective studies, and we'll be using the same little, I didn't quite go as far with the 2-point perspective studies on both of them because it took me so long to fill in the details on just this one. I thought that's probably enough. So that's why I want to manage your expectations. We might get pretty far pretty quickly. It just depends on questions and that sort of thing. But I maybe will only get details on one of these thumbnails, but we'll at least get them all laid out. We'll talk about how to find the vanishing point in these images and lots of tips and tricks for getting rolling with linear perspective. So I'm pretty sure our lovely moderator maybe already dropped the classes that I was mentioning in the chat, but if not, that would be a good time to drop those now or reference those. We had classes back in August and September of 2021, about a year and a half ago, where we talked about just drawing basic boxes in 1, 2, and 3-point perspective, but we didn't quite get into architecture. Well, we did a little bit. There was a house mixed media piece that we did where we drew a house that was in 2-point perspective. But other than that, we kind of just covered the basics. So if you want to refer back to those tonight, that would be good to, pause and go back and then come back to this recording. But you can still, stick with us tonight. But if you feel a little lost with the basics, you can reference those. Okay, so being on Zoom and teaching this is always just a little bit tricky, because the easiest way I have always found to explain the differences between 1, 2, and 3-point perspective when I'm teaching a class or a group of folks is to take them out into the hallway and just look at a corner. Look down the center of the hallway, look at a corner, and then maybe if we're nearby something where we can go outside and look up at a tall building, then that's even better to see a 3-point perspective. But I'm just going to show you these 3 images right now that I took on a walk in downtown Austin. Okay, so this is the same view, or this is the same, what am I trying to say? The same alley. This is the same scene viewed in 3 different perspectives here, okay? So in this scene, this picture of the alley, we're seeing a 1-point perspective because we are standing, the viewer, the perspective of the viewer, the photographer, me taking the picture, I was standing and pointing my camera down the center of this alley. And so what has happened is an optical illusion that we all mass hallucinate together has taken place. If we're facing a building, I just realized I didn't take a picture of like the face of this building. That would have been really helpful, but I can use one of these other images to illustrate the difference between when you're facing something head on, we see it the way it really is. So these buildings that we're looking at head on right here, we see that the windows and the sides of the windows, the tops and the bottoms of the windows and the sides of the windows are all straight and parallel when they're facing us. Okay, that's a fact. We can measure them. They are straight parallel lines that do not converge at any point. They are facing us, and so we see them as they really are. Okay, but then if we were to look at those windows, like let's say we're standing in the middle of a hallway and we're looking at the side of the hallway, we're looking at a picture frame on the side of the hallway, we're looking at the door frame, all those things are straight and parallel. The horizontal lines that are facing us are straight and parallel. But then when we turn and stand in the middle of that hallway or that alley or the train tracks or whatever, you're standing in the middle of it. Now these horizontal lines that are parallel to each other, they do this crazy thing. They don't actually do it, but it appears as if these horizontal lines that are now traveling away from us, the viewer, they appear to converge at this magical point on the horizon that is relative to us, the viewer, to the person who's viewing it. So if I'm standing here next to somebody who's 7 feet tall, their view of the horizon line is going to be different than mine. It's going to be a little higher up. But for me, the horizon line is where my eye level falls. And that is the point where these horizontal lines that are parallel and traveling away from me, the viewer, they now become what we call orthogonal lines. And the orthogonal lines appear to converge at this one point called the vanishing point on the horizon. And if all that is Greek to you, you can refer back to that basics class where we just take that idea and just draw squares and turn them into cubes, talking about all that. But I'm just gonna move along and assume everybody's got a basic understanding of that. And we're gonna focus on this architecture and how it's behaving according to those vanishing points. Okay, so we're looking down the middle. So we've got one point on the horizon where it appears all of our orthogonal lines are converging on this vanishing point. Now, what's the difference between 1 and 2 point perspective? It's extremely simple. It is the difference between standing in the middle of something and facing the corner of something. So this image shows the exact same alleyway. This is the exact same thing in the other photograph. See, it's right there. See, there it is. Okay, but now I'm looking at the corner. I'm not standing in the middle anymore. I'm looking at the corner. So now everything on this side of the corner appears to, these orthogonal lines appear to converge at a vanishing point way over here to the right of me, the viewer, on that horizon line where my eye level falls. And at the point where these lines converge, we call it the first vanishing point. And then on the other side of the corner, these orthogonal lines are traveling to a second vanishing point where everything on the left appears to be converging. And then we've actually got the other, these are facing towards our original vanishing point over here. So we'll touch on all that when we break that down in the class on 2 point perspective next month, but I just wanted to talk about the difference between 1 and 2 and 3 point perspective real quick. So that's the difference between 1 and 2 point perspective. And then 3 point perspective, see this brown business right here on the building? Okay, so if I look up at that, now I'm seeing things in 3 point perspective. And the difference there is I focused on the horizontal lines and what they were doing in 1 and 2 point perspective, but the vertical lines, these lines that travel straight up and down, they remain straight in 1 and 2 point perspective. They still remain straight, although those are actually a tiny bit in 3 point perspective, but we'll pretend they're not. But these vertical lines remain pretty straight in 1 and 2 point perspective. But in 3 point perspective, that's what we call either worm's eye view or bird's eye view. And so now those lines that would have remained straight, the vertical lines that would have remained straight in 2 point perspective and 1 point perspective, are now converging and becoming orthogonal lines that converge at a third vanishing point, either high above or far below the horizon line. And so in 3 point perspective, we have a third vanishing point that we call the zenith point. And now not only do our horizontal lines travel to vanishing points on the left and on the right, but even our vertical lines are traveling to a third vanishing point far above or far below the horizon line. So that is the difference between 1, 2, and 3 point perspective. It's just the different views that we have. Its perspective refers to the point of view of the perspective of the viewer. Okay, so, and then if that's not super confusing enough for you, we're going to really get into it farther down the line in this series, where we're going to talk about what's happening in an image like this, which is quite complicated, but I don't want to get too much into the weeds there, but I might flash an image of how I mapped that one out in just a moment. I know that was a mouthful. That was quite a bit what I just said, but were there any super relevant questions to that that maybe wouldn't be answered in my basics class that I referred to? Or you can ask them anyway, and then I can tell you if. Are there any pressing questions, Carrie?
Not that I see so far.
Okay, great. All right, so let's start sketching one of these out. So the first thing I want you to do is, you can do this if you have the digital version of the photo, but it works best if you have a printout. So what I want you to do is take the printout of these photos, and if you've got it not printed out, you can just take the photo on your phone. When I used to teach high school, one time I had somebody, or maybe even in an adult class, I have seen people do this multiple times. They have just taken their device and taped it to the piece of paper. It works as long as you don't, have like a screensaver that's going to come on after a few minutes. But if you can, just get the image somewhere where you can kind of visualize and draw and draw around it, or it doesn't have to be on top of it. But if you can get it on a piece of paper so that you can draw around it, that is ideal. So I've got this taped down in my sketchbook. And so you're going to take a couple pieces of tape. I guess I did not put tape on the supply list, but that's pretty easy, even if you need to just like weight it down with, an eraser or something so it's not moving. And then you're going to take your ruler and your pencil, and we are just going to start drawing lines. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this extreme perspective here just a little bit is because honestly, it's very hard to walk around in the world and look at architecture and have it just be like textbook 1 and 2 and 3 point perspective, because we've got different elevations we might be walking on. We've got architecture that's far away from us or very large. when you're drawing from a photograph of architecture, it's very hard to just have, yeah, like I said, have it just be this like perfect textbook idea of linear perspective. So we are going to fudge this one just a tiny bit, this image, because these vertical lines are not completely straight. So I just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out for anybody who's, you know, really studying this photo and realizing as I go along, for the sake of simplifying things, when I sketch this tonight, I'm gonna just make these lines vertical, even though they are not vertical. They actually do a little bit of like some 3-point perspective here, converging. So, but I think it's good to include stuff like this and just to show you that, you know, your drawing skills can be, you can leave things open to interpretation as long as you are following the basic rules of perspective. It's still going to appear in your drawing or your sketch, you know, to look like the world as we perceive it, as long as you're following these rules. But you don't have to drive yourself totally nuts making everything exactly like the photo. And to illustrate that, I just want to show you real quick, and then we're going to get to the drawing, how I sketched that one a couple of times. But I took one of these photos that's extremely complicated, and later on down the line, we're going to get into this, like in June, after we've covered my perspective. So I mapped this photo. I just took my pencil and I sketched where all these orthogonal lines were pointing to using my ruler. And it's like the Matrix, you guys. And you know why? Because I took this photo from a 21st floor window looking down at this building, and I zoomed in with my camera. So I'm zooming in with my phone that's pointed down. What my phone is doing, the point of view of my phone, is not something that you're going to likely get a picture of unless you're like a window washer or something, you know? So the point of view is very, very complicated. And if you're just standing in a hallway or on some railroad tracks, hopefully the architecture is like going to cooperate with you and your ruler in a simplified way. But oftentimes it's not. So I also wanted to talk about just like not driving yourself nuts, but still having a satisfying sketch in linear perspective, because you can follow the rules of perspective without getting MC Escher on yourself, or not, you don't have to. So that's what we're doing tonight. Okay, so we'll take our ruler and we'll just start focusing on what the horizontal lines are doing. And then when it comes to the building, we're just gonna pretend those are straight and vertical for the sake of tonight's class. Any questions about that? Jumping out?
So far, so good.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I'm just tracing the lines from the very top of the building, and I don't necessarily know where my horizon line is yet. I don't necessarily know where my vanishing point is yet. I'm just tracing lines right now so I can try to figure that out. And having it taped down to the paper like this allows me to, you know, just keep drawing these lines until I figure out. So right now they're all converging at a downward angle, but then what's starting to happen when I get to like right here is the horizontal lines have become straight. So that tells me that this is it right here. This is the horizon line, because now I've got a straight line happening where it was an angle. And then as I start going below that line, what's starting to happen is the orthogonal lines are now angling up. So we have an equatorial line. All right, so we can find our equator line where it's totally straight, and we can draw that straight line. And then we can just look over here at where all these lines were converging, and there it is. That's the point where they are intersecting. So I might have a couple of like weird wonky lines where it's like, oh, that one maybe got away from me. Just ignore that, because you know, we're figuring it out as we go. And that one, maybe you moved the ruler, like that's probably what happened right there with me. So if that's what's happening with you, just keep going till you figure it out. It's going to be obvious when you get enough of those lines on there. And that's the easiest way that I've discovered to find the vanishing point in a photograph. It's easier in a photograph like this. Where'd it go? My standing in the middle photograph where the vanishing point is right on the page. It's in the photograph itself. So with this one, you might take a red pencil or a red pen so that it's more obvious. Like here, let me take a white. See if this, got a white Faber-Castell. Oh yeah, that'll work. And just start drawing my lines like that. Although that's not really showing up very well. It looks like it would. Here's a reddish. Okay. I'm just looking for those. I found it pretty quickly right there where they cross. But then if you think you found it, double check it, because sometimes there can be like a wonky moment. So actually I want to see, there's got to be a moment where all of this intersects. Because yeah, this is a tricky moment because see, this is the world's always throwing curveballs at you like this because this is downhill. So there's actually a couple of vanishing points right here. There's the vanishing point for like the path at the bottom of the hill. And then there's the eye level vanishing point for these buildings. So the world doesn't owe you anything. It does not owe you the textbook example of linear perspective. And that's why I think a lot of people get frustrated when they're drawing in linear perspective, because you want everything to line up like those railroad track printouts that we give our, you know, beginning level students, and that's like the boxes that we drew. But then when you start looking at the world and how things look in a photograph like this. Okay, so now it's becoming more obvious, especially if we just focus on like these. Like you can even see it, what's happening, right? They're angling down, and then right here we have a straight line. So we know that the vanishing point for these needs to be on that straight equator line, which is the horizon line where the eye level of the viewer. Right, and then our vanishing point is that moment where they intersect. All right, so let's draw that. I'm going to focus on this one first, and then we'll do the other one since this one is simple and I know we can get through it. Okay, so what we're going to do is just sketch a little thumbnail box. We're going to make it little. If your printout turned out nice and small, then that's even better because you can, I'm going to tear that other printout out so that I just have it. You You could even draw your box the exact same size as the printout. So just measure your printout, and let's say it's like 3 by 4 inches, about that, then sketch your box about 3 by 4 inches. So I'm going to do that right now. And I'm using a 2B pencil, but I always want you to use a lighter pencil when you are just getting started so that you can draw lines that are easy to erase, especially with stuff like this. Use light pressure on your pencil. A nice light mechanical pencil would work great, like I said. Okay, so I'm just drawing a 3 by 4 box. And I'm drawing it off to the side so that I can get my, oh wait, we're doing this one where it's in the middle, but with the other one, draw it down the middle or off to the side so you can get your vanishing points in there on the page, you know, in that negative space. You could also do, there's a third photograph in these reference photos that I provided that shows 1 point perspective. I showed it to you just a moment ago. Let me find it. This one, the sidewalk. You can find where the eye level is. I feel like it's pretty obvious because it's that straight line, that straight line on the little stone wall. And then above that, or no, actually, there's another vanishing point. There's this one, it's maybe over here, because there's the horizon. It's not always where the sky meets the land, by the way. And I went into that in another class on called just perspective studies back a year and a half ago or so, where I used some images and I talked about this, how the vanishing point is not there's not going to just be one all the time, and it's not going to be perfectly on the horizon where the, you know, we think about the landscape like the horizon being where the sky meets land, but the eye level of the viewer horizon line might not be there. So, okay, so we've sketched our little box, and we want to sketch the basic linear perspective that we're seeing in this photograph. Okay, so we can look at the image itself, and you could, let's say this was a 3 by 4 box, you could even measure from the top of the photo to the bottom of the photo and see where the horizon line falls. If this was a photograph taken using the rule of thirds, that horizon line would be dropped down into the bottom thirds of the top thirds. And I guess I kind of did that with the end of the path. I put that like in the bottom thirds when I was taking the photo. But the horizon line is actually the one for the buildings, is right smack in the middle. So not my best composition, but that's not what we're worried about here. So I'm just gonna put it approximately in the middle. I'm just going to draw a nice light line for the horizon line approximately in the middle of the box. Okay, and then I can see that I'm just going to eyeball it for where I'm going to put this little rectangular negative space shape. So we're not going for perfection here in these studies. And I'm not even going to use my ruler. I'm just going to go ahead and sketch what I see there is this little keyhole view, right? Okay, and then below that, I've got the sidewalk, which, or the alleyway, which doesn't follow linear perspective perfectly because it curves down, right? Because of the elevation. So, but I just want to get it to look like that. So we're using observation here. We're using our common sense. We're using our basic observation of the photograph. We're using everything we've got. We're using a ruler to measure the photograph itself. We're using spatial reasoning to see, like, okay, where should I put this line in my sketch? I can go maybe a quarter of the way up, or maybe a little bit more than a little bit less than a quarter of a way up that would be a quarter of the way up. So let's say an eighth of the way up in the photo and just do a little tick mark like right here. Okay, and then we can just combine that. So we don't have to be perfect with everything. And then same thing on this side of the alleyway where it goes off the view. You could measure all this and be a little more exact if you wanted, or you can just eyeball it like I'm doing. And I'm gonna say that's about a quarter of the way up right there. I'm gonna draw that line a little darker so it shows up on the zoom. Okay, so we're focusing on these buildings now. We're gonna ignore this part of the building. We're gonna get to this one in just a moment because this one's complicating it a little bit for me right off the bat. So I'm going to focus more on these really obvious orthogonal lines. These are like the power lines on one side of the photo, and then the little ridges on this, what do you call it? It's like this garage door right here. That's what it looks like. Okay, so I'm just gonna take my ruler out from my vanishing point and I'm just gonna start radiating lines out from that point, like a little sunburst. Okay, so I'm just trying to find where all these main orthogonal lines are gonna fall because most of them are doing a pretty textbook thing here. So we're gonna focus on the parts. Take it bird by bird, right? Okay, so radiating up from there. I'm just taking my ruler and just getting right on that vanishing point line and just moving it down like a tick each time. Pretty much everything that catches your eye in the sketch and makes you believe you're looking at something in one point perspective is going to fall on these lines. There's definitely some wild card moments because of the elevation and the landscape that we discussed and the architecture itself. You know, sometimes things just kind of break the rules because of the way that they're shaped or like I said, the landscapes that they're on. Okay, for the most part, everything's gonna line up with this like bow tie. You know, we don't need to go straight up or straight down with it, although we could keep going. Like I'm just gonna keep going for the sake of the details that we're gonna add, like things like this little drip of moisture, whatever, like somebody poured some water out right here or something going down the alley. That is still following this path, you know, this general path. So if you wanted to go ahead and radiate out from the center down the center, that will help you as you're adding things like leaves and details on this path to make sure that those are following the rules of perspective here. Also, let's talk a little bit about the atmospheric perspective. Speaking of the leaves, look how I can see some of the leaves, like the leaf shapes right here. They're much closer to the viewer. They're in the foreground. So they appear to be almost their actual size. You can see like some cute little heart shapes of some of the leaves right here. So when I'm sketching those in, I can make those nice and detailed. But then as they get farther away from me, they get smaller and smaller. And then the leaves that are really far back, those are just like little dots on the page. So that's our atmospheric perspective that we're seeing there. All right, and then now let's get some of these vertical lines in here. So we want our vertical lines to stay straight and perpendicular to the horizon line. So I'm going to take my ruler and keep it vertical and straight, and I'm just going to eyeball it once again and just find where the side of that garage door is, and it's about right here. Let's see, in the other one that I did put a little bit of that line coming out right there. Let's do that because that's a good thing to notice. Can really throw people off. This little awning that's hanging over right here, I need a straight there, and that's because it's facing me, the viewer, so it's not affected by the linear perspective that's happening there. And likewise with the top of it, that's just as it appears. It is as it appears, straight and vertical right there, but then the very bottom of it, it's in a heavy shadow, but the bottom of it is following the rules of 1-point perspective right there. Okay, so but then the little side of that is also following the rules of 1-point perspective and is angling down. So we've got another little, got some depth happening right here. And then we've got some other openings like in the side of this architecture, which create a vertical line right there. And then it just stays pretty vertical, honestly, as it goes, because everything is so severely skewed. These angles right here, we're not seeing a lot of detail, but we can see the vertical lines of the side of these things. So I'm just going to add a series of vertical lines right there for all that. There are some horizontal lines in there, but we're not going to get too complicated here, folks. Okay, so yeah, I think in this sketch, I just made it all nice and dark right there. I might have exaggerated and added some things, took some artistic liberties, which is what I wanted to encourage you to do. So once you get your main information in there, feel free to ad lib a little bit, you know, as long as the window that you add has lines that become orthogonal lines and follow that linear perspective path, you can kind of fudge it and add something like that if you want to. So I'm just going to fill these in with like some hatching lines. I'm going to go rogue a little bit and just sketch these in without a ruler so we can start to get some details in here. Okay, and I'm going to switch to, oh wait, let me talk about this building back here. Okay, so this one does follow, it does add up. I can see it, it's doing, but it just kind of curves and comes back in the other direction and does kind of a funny thing right there. So with this one, I've got all these guidelines to help me. And I think the easier thing to do is just look at the overall contours of this building and see that it kind of dips down a little bit and it curves and it kind of does something like that right there. And since I drew that shape on top of where the other lines are, just go ahead and just add some value that follows those orthogonal lines. It's like I said, your viewer looking at the photograph is going to interpret that as accurate. We don't need it to be absolutely perfect. Although right here is the moment where I wanted to like put the sidewalk that comes in a little bit. This is where the architecture is just doing a different sort of thing. So we're just using our observational skills to see how the building kind of curves in right here. There's like a little, some electrical boxes and stuff that go up the side of the building. So those are vertical. So we're just using some common sense. Sometimes people can get a little too married to the idea of, you know, forcing the textbook linear perspective onto a photo, that they don't just stop and observe what the photo is doing and just sketch it in a little freehand in that moment. But then the main points, like stuff like this, where it comes out at a 45-degree angle perpendicular to the horizon, then you want to grab your ruler and get that sort of thing accurate. And that's going to bring it to life. Okay, so let's grab a pencil with a little more value here, my 8B, and just add some details. And like I said, these will depend on your drawing skills. Adding some of these things, just be kind of loosey-goosey, I'd say, and just get like the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light in there, the details like the water stain coming down the alleyway really will bring that to life. All right, we are getting close to the end of the hour, and I had a feeling this was going to happen because, like I said, I think I went too far when I was planning this, and that's why with the 2-point perspective, I kept the second thumbnail pretty empty. So let's just talk about mapping out that real quick. So I'm not going to get to very many details on that one. Any questions about this one though? Or any questions about finding this information in the photograph, like general questions that would apply any photograph? Those are the best kind of questions, I think, because I never try to teach in a way that feels like everybody's just able to apply it to just this one example. I want you to be able to apply this method to lots of examples. Oh, my cat. Being cat. I'm trying to climb into a bag, you guys. Sorry, background noise. Okay, so let's move on to the other image, which I already mapped, and let's see if I can maybe sketch it directly on the page with this one. That'll make it a little so that on another piece of paper because there's too many lines on this page. Okay, so we're going to draw another little box. Another little 3x4 box. I think that's a good rectangular size for your sketchbook. All right, and with this one, I'm just gonna look at the distance from the edge of the graph to about where that vanishing point needs to be. Or maybe I'll start with, let's start with the horizon line again. That's the easiest way, and let the lines find your vanishing point for you. Okay, so let's go about, again, about an eighth of the way up on the photo, right here, and draw our horizon line. Go ahead and let that horizon line reach way over there to the edge. Okay. And then we'll just keep wanting to start with the vanishing point, but I think it's better if we start with the top of the architecture. So let's see. Oh, look, it's about halfway where this line is, where it comes out. It's about halfway down from the top of the page, to the bottom of the page. So that's helpful. You can find our approximate halfway point on the photo, which is, I'm going to even kind of measure it. Think about right there. Okay, and then I'll just connect that line, angle it down. To my horizon line like that. And if that feels too severe, you can erase it. Okay, so if you start sketching your architecture in and you're like, you know, I think it needed to be farther out this way because that's making the building angle like way too severe. Like looking at that, I think actually that's what's about to happen here. So angle it out a little bit more, like there. Okay. And then in order to find that horizon line quickly, I'm going to look at the photograph again and see like where did that angle start to come up from under the horizon and start to, you know, the bottoms of the windows are now pointing up instead of down. And it was like right here is where it gets to be more obvious. So maybe I'll just come down under my horizon line right about here and start to angle up and just look over there on the horizon and see where's that moment where those are going to intersect. So I can quickly find my vanishing point. Okay, so now I found it using my skills to compare the two photographs and see that that looks like it's happening in about the right moment off to the side there. And I'll take my ruler and just do my same sort of radiating out thing. And we are almost out of time, so I'm just gonna finish this and then stop there. But I think we covered everything I wanted to cover in this class. We talked about the differences between 1, 2, and 3-point perspective when looking at the real world and looking at architecture, and how not to be overwhelmed and how to, you know, take it one step at a time to find those vanishing points and then make, you know, selective editing if necessary to simplify it. If there's a moment where you're like, oh, that just makes my brain hurt, you know, you can just ignore that part of the photograph and make sure that the main ideas are following linear perspective. Okay, so any questions right now that are jumping out about this? There is not hammering. I apologize. My cat is really going to town on her food bowl, y'all. I apologize for the background noise. Anybody want to hold up their sketches from tonight or their page of notes? I love a good page of notes. Or even better, if you applied these things to your own photograph or a different photograph that I provided for you. I'd love to see how you're applying the skills that we covered tonight to find the vanishing point and the 1-point perspective and the horizon line and all that in your own photos. That's always so rewarding to me because it means you really learned something. So if you just hold up your sketch, we can spotlight you. Okay, yes, look at that one. That looks great. And I know that this is something that's very challenging for a lot of people. So hopefully this helped some of you get a breakthrough. Oh, very nice. Yeah, and I love the character, like putting your own kind of style in there and illustrating in a way that is singular to how you draw. That's part of it. So not making something that's perfect. That's never my end game. Arlene, very nice. And I see you found the vanishing point in that other photograph too. Very nice. Okay, so I'm noticing on that one, this one, Kristen's that's up right now, above the horizon line, your lines are still on that garage door are still kind of angling in an upward direction. So maybe take that ruler and radiate out so those can line up. Ooh, yeah, look at that. Some of those leaves in there. Keep adding those details that follow atmospheric perspective. That really creates that optical illusion, which is what we're trying to do, right? Very nice. Yeah, I love how you kind of improvised and added some different details to the architecture over there to the side too. All right, Krish. Yeah, same thing on that one on the right side there. It looks like, yeah, don't force it to follow the textbook radiation thing. You can kind of, I might have done that a little bit in my example tonight too, but I think then once I erased and put that little indentation in the side, it fixed it. Oh yeah, I like it. Oh, look at those leaves. Okay, cool. Are we at time yet? Let's see, we got 1 minute left. Well, I'm gonna hop over to my Instagram and do my little live thing. If any of you want to join me there at Adrienne Hodge Art, and I will continue to answer any questions you might have about linear perspective. And yeah, thank you all for joining me. Hopefully I'll see you next week for the sketch of this 1-point perspective cupcake, which this perspective in this one is very simplified. It's mostly just this table. So don't be intimidated by this. Most of this architecture in the background is facing straight forward. So it's pretty simplified, and that's a fun little painting. The cupcake itself is following the rules of perspective as it comes in at the bottom and the plate. So we'll talk about all of that. Hopefully I'll see you next time. And I'm just gonna let my cat Linda have a cameo since she just wants to be seen. There she is. All right, thank you all. Have a great evening. Good night.